Hi everyone, Heather here with astrologywithheather.com, and I am back with another special video. And today I have with me Justin Vasilivas, who is a wonderful astrologer who I've been working with for several months now. And I'm super excited about the topic that we're going to be talking about. It's one of my favorite topics, relocation astrology. And this is a very important time to talk about relocation astrology, which we're totally going to get into here. But without further ado, I'm going to bring on Justin. Hello, Justin. Welcome.
Hi, Heather. I'm really excited and honored to be with you today and looking forward to contributing to the broadcast in some way.
Yeah, thank you so much for being here and for sharing your experience with us. And so a lot of our viewers probably aren't familiar with you and your work. So I wanted to just take a moment to ask you a little bit about how you got into astrology, what your experience is, and a little bit about why you're interested in relocation astrology specifically, because this is something that I'm super interested in too, but not a lot of people do it. And of the people who do it, not a lot of people do it really well.
Right.
As much as I hate to say that. So yeah, so let's get into this.
Yeah, so I guess my metaphysical career started in 2009, where I like to shy away from the idea of awakening. I'll call it my remembrance. And through synchronicities, I ran into my mentor, Ashley Stamatinos, and she worked at a kind of metaphysical school in Chicago called Equilibrium. It was kind of like a Hogwarts. So I always kind of grew up with very, interesting paranormal experiences, and I wanted to make some sense of it. So I originally got into Reiki and completed all levels of Reiki and started teaching Reiki in Chicago. And that kind of like just opened a bunch of different doors for me to where I started learning Shamballa healing and eventually led my path to Colorado, where I studied and lived with a shaman. And then, this astrology that kind of was introduced to my life, very evolutionary way, where the last number of years I've had two personal astrologers, a male and a female, because I was very interested on both the dynamics and perspective of that. And I saw just how it played out in my life, and it just grabbed my curiosity. And now it's almost to a point of, I'll call it healthy obsession. But I just feel that this has been a big part of my journey. And when you specifically relocation of place, I feel like it's been a huge catalyst of change, transformation, growth, and healing. One would say you maybe get more out of life when you relocate your chart. It's interesting because I wanted to kind of put myself through an exercise before I met with you. And I sat down and I chronicled how many times I've moved in my life, and I cataloged in an order. And my most recent move to Idaho, my first house, was my 30th move, and being
Jeez,
37 years old. So, and then
you
I thought
you
back
have
even
been.
further. And it's the last 5 or 6 years I've been in corporate marketing, and I had territories in the Midwest and mountain regions. And I also had to go to a lot of seminars all over the United States. And I took note how my frequency changed based on where I was placed. So I had a lot of past life experiences, on my North Node line in Texas. And, I had some, funky energy on the East Coast. So I remember several business meetings, like, I would like tell my boss I didn't want to go to Boston. Like I just had this fear of like going to Boston for some way, but then I would travel to Colorado and have a different experience. So being a Taurus, I have a heavy Taurus in my chart, so I kind of could tap into the frequency of the land.
Mhm.
And my most recently, last 4 years, when I've had Saturn and Pluto enter my fourth house, I moved from Chicago to Boulder to now Idaho. And those experiences there really kind of crowned my development. I could really see the magic of astrocartography and how it plays a role in your life.
Yeah, wonderful. So yeah, so I mean that's kind of similar to my experience. Like I moved around a lot and you traveled to a lot of different places, and that's why I became interested in astrocartography and relocation astrology specifically because I noticed that this makes such a huge difference. And oh my goodness, you've moved so much. So you probably have a lot of different experiences with a lot of different energies. And it's tangible. Like you can feel it when you're in a different location and the energy shifts, and especially when you have a really strong placement there, like if you're on one of your planetary lines or something like that. So yeah,
Absolutely.
absolutely. Well, that's awesome. That makes sense why you're so good at it then.
Well, yeah, I didn't kind of, read it or study it out of a book. I felt it. I touched, taste, and, felt it on a deeper level. So, and now when, specifically with Saturn moving through my fourth, I've had a great yearning for home. I kind of don't want to be a gypsy anymore, but I also know how healing it has been for me. And it kind of freaks out my fiance how much I've changed since moving to Idaho. But I have it developed a sense of fulfillment, and I want to help everyone find home in some way.
Oh, awesome. Well, that's awesome that you get to do that too. Yeah, and so you guys, Justin is actually awesome at relocation astrology. I've been trying to find someone because I get so booked up with readings and people always want me to do relocation readings because I have all these videos all over YouTube about it. And like, I mean, I just can't fulfill the number of orders. So many people are interested in astrology these days. And so when I'm not taking orders, I always feel bad that I don't have anyone to refer someone to for relocation. But Justin did a relocation reading for me and he looked at places where I've already been and he was so spot on, like so spot on. So he definitely, you have a talent for this for sure. And I remember looking at your chart and just looking at your placements, it makes sense that you would be good at relocation. Um, so yeah, this is exciting. So let's talk a little bit about what's going on right now, and maybe this little window of opportunity we have where there's a little bit of movement going on because things are about to tighten up again. I think at the end of this year and into next year. But right now we have, although there are a lot of retrogrades. So I mean, the retrogrades are good for rearranging, reevaluating things. The eclipses are coming, so people are going to be making major life changes as always during the eclipse season. But we have kind of this period right now, even though there's a lot of craziness going on in the astrology where we don't have this intense activation of Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter like we will in the fall when we have that Mars coming into Aries and starting to square all of that. So things are, even though they're a little crazy, they're not quite as restrictive as they will be. So this is a good time to kind of think about making a move, rearranging, making the changes that you want to make in your life because there's momentum behind it and there's not as much of that sort of stuck energy that we've been experiencing for the first half of this year.
No, absolutely. I mean, this party kind of started, when Mars squared Neptune and Saturn and Pluto went conjunct, and then we saw the restriction when, Mars kind of hit, Saturn, Pluto, and Jupiter like bowling pins. And I feel like Mars is coming back in the fall to pick up the spare,
Yeah.
and really kind of, I mean, we might react differently to it now that we have a taste of freedom. Now we want to keep that. We don't want to go back the way it was. And I think with us being in isolation, I know we don't prefer what's been going on, but I feel like it's a weird way for the universe to, have us kind of face ourselves and with, the new moon in Taurus, like what are our values? What do we want in life? We have different focuses on what our values are. And, like you said, with the node shifting, I think everyone's kind of having a phase of awakening again. And, like you said, with Venus retrograde and Mercury retrograde, that's not ideal. It kind of gives that window a little bit smaller. I would say Venus and Mercury retrograde is a good time to plan something large or revisit if you had these thoughts.
Mhm.
Then you have that even smaller window in August to actually make the physical move. But I feel like where we are is kind of where we're going to be. And if you have to live with that decision, or if you have a small opportunity to break free and continue your evolution as a soul, the time is ripe.
Yeah, absolutely. And what do you think right now about travel too? Because people, I think, are afraid to travel. That's South Node in Sagittarius, same thing that happened right after 9/11, right?
Yep.
People are not traveling even if it's opened up and they're allowed to. But the North Node's in Gemini, right? So small trips. And you can even make a difference in your energy by going a few hundred miles in certain circumstances. So what are your thoughts on that for this summer?
Yeah, I'm already seeing it in place because originally I was slated to get married in December and do a destination wedding in Sedona. But with everything going on in the world, I felt that would be more difficult, especially with Sedona having a higher, elderly population, um, and plus with family and their fears. And I just assumed actually that people would take advantage of the greatest, airfare in history and hotel fare in history. And I've been having a lot of conversations with people, and they're willing to come, but I'm kind of shocked that how everyone's electing to drive 25 hours
Yeah.
from Chicago to come see me, and they're renting RVs and they're making it like a family vacation, which I feel will be like more of the normal vacation or the new normal of traveling and
Mhm.
experiencing that coming further, where long distance travel is going to be really restricted, or it's going to be just so many rules and regulations where you probably just want to go through the hassle of it. Post 9/11, we had the TSA. So who knows, maybe you need to show up 4 to 5 hours early for a flight. Maybe you need your temperature, or maybe you need to take a test in order to travel, or maybe not even travel at all. So I feel like this is kind of the new normal for us experiencing vacationing in that way. So I'm honored that people want to take the trip to see me, that, to honor our marriage, but I feel kind of bad that everyone has to kind of go through that. And there's that mounting fear
Mhm.
behind it. And it breaks my heart in some ways. Um, but I mean, it just seems like, if I look, anyone looking for an investment opportunity, I would invest in, RV rentals or something of
Mhm.
that nature, because that might be the main ticket to ride moving forward.
Yeah, and I've been saying that too. I think it's already been a big thing. Like camper vans and RVs and all that have become really popular and trendy in the past few years. I think we're only going to see that increase.
Yep.
And even the same thing, like we're supposed to be going to a wedding up in Michigan in October, and we're like, oh, are we going to fly? Like, are we going to be able to get back if we do fly? Like, what is that going to look like, right?
Right.
And so, we're kind of ahead of the trend. I love doing road trips. And so we've been wanting to do the whole camper van thing for a while, but it's the same thing. We're like, okay, well, even if we normally would fly, I don't think we're going to fly because who knows what that looks like, right?
Right.
And nobody wants to get stuck somewhere where they can't get back. If you drive, then you can usually drive, you can
Right.
get back. Um, but yeah, so this is kind of an opportunity this summer to get out a little bit, explore a little bit as much as, we're allowed to and we feel comfortable with. And I think that is going to be a big trend, like more driving and traveling. What the good thing about that though, the road trips, is
Mhm.
that you get to experience more energies.
Yes.
So you're like, my Mars line is here. This feels interesting. Next day you're on your Jupiter line. Next day you're on your, Venus line. So you can visit all these different locations with completely different energies for you and get a feel for all of it in a very sort of short span of time. And that's like one of my favorite things about doing road trips. I'm like, okay, well, I know that I have Jupiter over here, so let's stop here for a few days.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, you get a more thorough assessment of how your energy changes even
Mhm.
within a few hours. It's that literal sometimes.
Yeah.
So it's a good experiment for everybody.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's kind of get into the topic of discussion, which is going to be basically how you know if you're destined to have a big move or move around a lot or have some sort of crazy experience with relocation based on looking at your natal chart. And there are certain indicators for this that I know that you're familiar with. So let's
Yes.
just jump in.
Yeah, let's jump in. So a lot of this is just reading for others and my own experience. So I'll kind of fuse them together. But one in particular is Uranus in the fourth house or on the IC. It's Uranus is shock, change, disruption. So fourth house is sudden move, disruption in the home. Even if Aquarius occupies the fourth house, it requires a lot of freedom, a lot of independence. So if you have a natal fourth house Uranus, odds are you're going to have some changes, sudden changes in the home. That could show in a lot of different ways. If it's a natal, maybe you're more prone to just renting, or as opposed to laying down roots. Or if you do, maybe Uranus fourth house is a great opportunity. If you do want to buy an RV and travel the world, that might
Mhm.
be something very healing for that placement. If you do, for whatever reason, want to lay down roots, and you have the means to, I would say, maybe living in multiple cities would be something, or have a summer home, or maybe you buy a fixer upper or a remodel, and you're constantly changing the energy of that space. And then my own experience, I know it's not a traditional kind of keyword for travel, but it's, Uranus in the sixth and seventh. And when I lived in Chicago, because of how congested it is and traffic, I used to move very close to the corporations I worked at. And, after 9/11, Uranus was hitting my sixth house and I lost my job. And so I had to leave a roommate situation, then I changed companies, lost my job again. And then I moved again because I had to kind of get closer to my new place of work. Or even after that, I had Uranus go through my seventh house and had a lot of sudden relationships that kind of came out of nowhere and changed my life, and then they ended drastically. So I had to move and leave from those situations. So that's not very common when you talk about destiny, but it is part of the equation, especially from a transit perspective. Or even if you have Uranus in the seventh house, you might natally, you might have, unique relationships where you don't live in the same house as somebody.
Mhm.
And that could also cause for a lot of different travel as well. Or maybe it's a long distance relationship and you travel back and forth to see each other. So I have a love-hate relationship with Uranus, but ultimately it corrects our course and puts us on a right path. So same would go for, if you have a Jupiter in your fourth house or on your IC, odds are you'll probably have one long distance move in your life. Maybe even overseas if you have, Neptune in that conversation by aspect as well.
Mhm.
And even in the fourth house, I see a lot of people actually buy their first home when Jupiter comes into their fourth house. So especially if it's paired with like a Saturn return,
Yeah.
and those other things. So I had my first house ever when Jupiter came into my fourth. So that's also, a big indicator. There's also some that you don't really think about. This came from my own experience, is Mars in the fourth house, which is a friend of mine. We did a startup in Colorado, and early on in the development, we didn't have an office to go to. So we kind of worked out of home and we managed all these other rental properties, right? And my boss was just going crazy, and she had that fourth house placement, and she was an Aries sun. So she was just like impulsively leaving, working at coffee shops. She would just leave and go to the properties we're managing, and she would check in on her teams, maybe work remotely from that situation. So she was really antsy in the home. So that could be something that could translate into that fourth house placement. One of my favorite examples is North Node in the 10th house and South Node in the fourth. And when I think about that placement, I think about the movie Sweet Home Alabama, where, Reese Witherspoon had faded events, married her high school sweetheart or something, and became a big shot fashion designer. And then she kind of made a full circle home and kind of created a sense of healing in a cyclical term. So that could be, in a roundabout way, a good example how that would play out. And then, if Gemini, occupies your fourth house, I'd say that you may move away from the place where you're born. I wouldn't call that a long distance travel, but, odds are you might live within 150 miles of where you grew up and maybe bounce around that city for a period of time. And then also in some more, unfortunate situations, my experience, what drew me from Chicago to Colorado was, Saturn and Pluto in my fourth house. So I feel like there was, I needed to break myself free of the limitations and the pain and trauma of home, and kind of go somewhere where I could be myself and reinvent myself. I had, Pluto in the first house, a little bit of an identity crisis from my past. I feel like I couldn't be myself in Chicago, even though ironically, that's where I got all of my energy and education. I just felt like I couldn't spread my wings in a transformative way. So sometimes pain in the home will lead you elsewhere, and sometimes you might fully circle back, sometimes not. That could definitely be part of the conversation. So that's like a few examples that I feel that if you're destined to travel, whether it's natal placements or coming transits, but it can really rock your world. But it's just it's transforming you and asking you to have that soul evolution.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going back to like sign placements. So you talked about Gemini occupying the fourth house and what that would look like. For some of these planetary alignments, do you find that, let's say, like Aquarius in the fourth house has a similar impact as having Uranus in the fourth house and things like that? Because I know I have Aquarius in the fourth house.
No, I do. I feel like they have similar but different, vibrations. But yeah, I mean, at the very least, with that Aquarian occupation, there's just going to be a lot of need for independence. A very serendipitous way of being. A lot of freedom is required. So, if you're thinking about, marrying your high school sweetheart and laying down roots at 18 years old, it's probably not realistic for Aquarius occupying that space. And there's going to be a lot of movement and even shock and change. So all things that equal Uranus will translate to a very Aquarian type lifestyle. So very similar to, like I mentioned, like Uranus in the seventh house. If Aquarius occupies your seventh, you might have very different types of relationships where you need that freedom, and maybe you have a very healthy marriage, but you just never lived together. That's not more common nowadays than before, but so even not just fourth house placements, it's relationship placements and other.
Yeah, and that seventh makes sense too, because a lot of times when you have like Uranus or any planets transiting or occupying the seventh house, they might be squaring your IC, right? Or at the very least by sign or and by house, they're squaring your fourth house. And so I've seen that a lot too. And even in the first house,
Right.
like having Uranus in the first house, you're just an unsettled, like sort of frantic person to begin with.
Right.
So you're not going to want to stay in one place or stay put. And that can translate into like moving house and changing locations to kind of
Right.
shake up the energy, because people who have a lot of Uranian, a lot of Aquarian energy, they feel more comfortable when they're uncomfortable, like more
Right.
comfortable when everything's changing. So
Yeah, what's hectic for one person is normal for them, you know, and
exactly. Yeah. And what about placements where you're kind of destined to just stay close to home, stay close to your family, stay close to your roots? Because I know some of these placements we talked about, like you mentioned having Saturn in the fourth house, but you also have Pluto there, right? Which changes the energy. Typically, Saturn in the fourth house would be someone who wouldn't move around a lot, but when Pluto's there, there's this need to really transform. So, what would that look like in terms of things that would indicate maybe staying put?
yeah, you think of the home buddies of the astrology chart. You know, the Taurus. If Taurus is going to occupy your fourth house or Cancer, or maybe you're born in a new moon. That moon sun conjunction. They tend to stay at home for an extended period of time. They don't necessarily leave the nest so much later in life. But yeah, Cancer, Taurus occupying that space, fixed signs as well. But even Scorpio might, be impulsive in that placement, or led, by trauma. So you talk about Saturn, Pluto. Yeah, if it was Saturn individually, but Pluto kind of forced Saturn's hand a little bit, but then with that combination created a great yearning for home as well. So you think about too, it's not just placements. An eclipse could stir something up in your fourth house. Let's say you have your moon in the ninth house, ruled by Cancer. So the moon would be the ruler of your ninth house, long distance travel, and maybe you have a trine from Jupiter, or maybe a Neptune Jupiter conjunction trine your natal moon. That was probably force in a very harmonious way, either a long distance travel, even overseas move. So there's a lot of shapes and sizes to this, but
Yeah, yeah.
which
It's
makes them
pretty
fascinating.
broad. But that makes sense. So like one of the things I think we'll probably be seeing, you mentioned eclipses. We'll probably be seeing a lot of Virgo rising and a lot of Pisces rising people looking to move or change location in the next like year and a half, because we'll have the eclipses falling in their fourth and in their 10th house. Likewise, you might see a lot of career changes and shifts in these people too. They usually kind of go hand in hand with the eclipses, but yeah, so if you're a Virgo rising or a Pisces rising, be prepared for that.
Right.
Yeah. Well, cool. So yeah, I feel like we covered a lot of the different circumstances that could cause people to move based on their birth chart and some of the transits.
Right.
When people do decide to move, what do you recommend that they look for? Because there are a lot of different things that you could kind of focus in on with relocation astrology. What do you personally choose to focus in on?
There's really two steps to me, and I've learned the power of intention, especially through my shamanic training. And on a higher level, we have everything we need. We just need to pull it into form. So it really depends on what you're looking to accomplish, and you just can't look at the surface level. You have to look at how your planets move in the houses. But a general rule, for example, if you want to have abundance brought to your career, you might want to look where you can place your Venus, Jupiter, Sun on your midheaven, right? Venus could bring a lot of harmony and balance, some financial opportunities to your career. You'd be very charismatic. One of my intentions why I moved to Idaho is I have Venus on my MC. So since being here, I kind of came out of the closet astrologically. I started my YouTube channel. Opportunities like working with you kind of came with harmony and ease. Even if you're an entrepreneur and you have Venus on your MC, you might want to work with another entrepreneur that has Venus on their MC. I think that placement for both parties would create a lot of reciprocity,
Mhm.
even give and take, a very harmonious relationship. Maybe you want a lot of advancement in your career, and you might put Jupiter there, to
Mhm.
where really you could get in with a corporation and maybe move up the ladder very quickly, or great benefits would come through your career. The sun is a great placement because the spotlight's on you. You know, you are the actor in your own play, and also creates a lot more drive, and hard working, very focused in those areas. So it's tricky. It's not a one size fits all, because maybe you place your Venus there, but then you put Mars in your seventh house, and you have a lot of turbulent relationships. So
Mhm.
there's kind of a balance for that. But another example, very common, is career and relationship questions when people
Yeah.
contact me. So people want to find their relationship, right? So the same kind of three factors: Venus, Jupiter, and the Sun. You create balance in relationships. Maybe Venus would create benefits and financial opportunity working with people one-on-one relationships. Maybe you're an astrologer, you want to have a really good, healthy one-on-one relationship, or you're a counselor, or things of that nature. When funny story with me, when I met my fiance, I had Uranus and Venus conjunct my natal sun, and Jupiter was riding through her seventh house. So not only did we meet in that way with Jupiter and how it kind of expanded, but our relationship, even though we weren't planning on it, it moved very quickly. So we met, we fell in love, and she moved in with me. We got engaged, and then we decided to move cross country, like all in the same year. So it just escalated very quickly. Brought great benefits and healing to me. So and just on the flip side, if you're trying to move your chart, you probably don't want Pluto in your seventh house and
Yeah.
have some trauma and potentially narcissistic relationships. I had someone that she moved from Texas to Denver, and she would have just trauma and very narcissistic relationships and one-on-one relationships. Her business partners, and they were all just terrible, and she couldn't understand why. And I explained to her where she kind of moved her Pluto, and she kept wanting to go further west. I'm like, well, you're not really going to solve that problem. You probably, instead of going to LA, you might want to go maybe towards North Carolina and kind of clear that out. It was really a great placement for Pluto. I mean, maybe the fifth house is kind of beneficial out of all of them, but sometimes you could maybe get focused on one thing and create another situation for yourself. One of my aspirations coming here was Jupiter on my IC, and it was my first um, um, real estate purchase of my life. So I got a great deal, and this is going to appreciate very well. It's going to bring a happy home life. I've been really fun and playful around the house. And let's say that you want to use multiple placements. Let's say you're a budding real estate agent, right? And maybe you want to put Mercury on your MC, and Jupiter on in your IC. That way you could operate at a really high level. You're always on the phone, making phone calls, driving short distances to get to showings. But then you have the abundance and benefits coming through your IC through Jupiter. Good for the investments, or maybe working with other people. So let's say you want to be an entrepreneur, and you want to kind of put yourself out there. Maybe you have the sun buried in your 12th house, and you want to throw that on your ascendant, and you come into the spotlight, and you kind of come out of the closet and be who you are. So again, there's a lot of equations to the scenarios, but it's not like you go into you look at the astrocartography chart and you just find your Venus and you put it there and everything's good.
Yeah.
There is some layered thinking towards it, and but I would say is identifying your intention. What are you really looking to get out of this scenario, and what benefits can come to that, and locate the complementary planets to assist you in that venture.
Yeah, absolutely. And that is a wonderful approach. That's honestly, that's the way that I approach it too. Like, what does this person want? What is your intention for this move? And how can we align it so it works out that way? And
Right.
it's funny, we both moved to locations where Venus is on our midheaven. We have like the same intention.
Right. Which is going to be a really strong relationship between one of each other, and very reciprocal back and forth. So I think great
Yeah.
benefits will come from this relationship. So as a nice little side token, but
Yeah.
yeah, it
I
makes
mean,
a lot of
and
sense.
since I moved here, like the best work related connections, like, in terms of career and just partnering up and connecting and collaborating have been coming through. And so, it works. Astrology works.
It does, and from a shamanic view, you really want to stay in flow. And the best way to stay in flow is, use the planets of great strength and benefit and have them working for you instead of against you. So the more you're in the flow, the more you open yourself up to possibilities.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. So, is there anything else that you want to kind of touch on before we sign off here? I feel like we covered a lot. So,
Well, if you want, I know we talked about just, placement on the angles. I did prepare my natal chart to my current chart in Idaho. If you wanted to just kind of take a few planets, and I could talk about how it's changed and how that energy is different in different places to give people a different perspective on that.
yeah, we can totally do that. Examples are always helpful. So,
Okay, so I wanted to share a few examples of how not only placing planets on the angles change your frequency, but how you shift planets in different houses. So, for example, my intention with my chart was I really wanted to strengthen my career, and especially with the great shifts in my own destiny coming forward, I wanted to give myself the most support as possible. So moving Venus, when I moved my chart from my natal chart to Idaho, it moved Venus onto the MC and Jupiter to the IC. But
there's
the,
your,
outside of just placing planets on the angles, what I really also wanted to do is, as you noticed in my first chart, I had a pretty intense stellium in my eighth house. Pretty destructive party going on there. So I wanted to clear out my eighth house. As we know, like the second, sixth, eighth, and 12th houses could be problematic based on the planets you have there. And, ultimately, I want to also kind of clear out my first house a little bit as well. So what's the difference? So with Mercury and Chiron moving from my eighth to ninth, so that's a lot of toxic thoughts. That's dealing with a lot of, it's a daily battle with anxiety and stress. And, a lot of that was through my experiences in Chicago. What happens is I move my Mercury and Chiron to the ninth house, and, ninth house is, higher education, higher wisdom. How do I deal with my toxic thoughts now? Well, shamanism. I moved my chart and I learned shamanic ways to deal with anxiety and trauma, whether it's soul retrieval, power animal retrieval, what have you. That was giving me, clearing out my eighth house and giving me an empowering way to deal with that energy. Another notable one is, Mercury and Mars. So that's very like, kind of nervous energy, tap your leg. It's very common for Mercury Mars people to be smokers, right? So in Chicago, I actually was a smoker. That's how I dealt with my empathic response to 8 million people. And, which also was due to my Pluto placement. But when I moved to Colorado, actually, where I noticed this instantly is I actually quit smoking cold turkey, moving my chart from Chicago to Colorado. And then obviously, the same energy exists here for me in Idaho. So there was, didn't say that it didn't have my temptations, but it took less energy to kind of overcome that hurdle. Also, Chicago's 8 million people, Denver has like 6 million people. I wasn't that patient behind the wheel with that Mercury and Mars. So I wouldn't maybe call it to the extreme of road rage, but I moved to a state that has 200,000 people in their city and 1.7 million people in the entire state. So my frequency when interacting or drive around locally, that is, I'm very patient. I like to drive around. I like to explore. Whereas in all those areas, it caused me quite a bit of trouble. Another example of changing the energy from kind of malefic planets, I had Saturn in my second house. That is kind of my inherent lack consciousness or even trouble with self-esteem in my second house. And I moved that into my third house where I didn't, with Saturn in the second house, you have to work really hard for your money. And not that I didn't have to work hard for it, but getting it out of the second house, it kind of, opportunities came with me with a little more ease. And, the one way to heal, Saturn in the second is you kind of put your back against the wall. If you fear of losing things or have lack consciousness, me becoming an entrepreneur kind of healed that, where I put all the chips in my basket, and was a way to gain strength and confidence in myself. So getting me out of Chicago into a more harmonious placement, obviously opened the doors for those type of opportunities for me. And then obviously we talked about, Venus on my MC. As soon as I moved here, I kind of came out of the closet with my astrology channel. I started meeting groups of people through my networking and social media and being kind of forward facing. And then, gracefully enough, getting an opportunity with you today to talk publicly and be kind of putting my reputation out there. And then also, with my Jupiter and then the fourth, I bought my first house. And since especially it's important because I work from home, like we all do right now. But kind of having that extra harmony and benefit from working from home in combination with my career. So that's just kind of a few examples how not only placing your planets on different angles, but how you would move certain planets out of troubled houses into
Mm.
more harmonious aspects to kind of flip that energy. Or your natal chart's your natal chart, but if you get yourself some assistance and to further enhancing your life, relocating your chart can definitely maximize those opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially, I mean, when you have like a lot of difficult energy, like that eighth house energy, the sun in the eighth house can be pretty hard. And so sometimes you just want to lighten things up a little bit and have a little bit more fun. And so just shifting enough where your sun is in the ninth house really opens things up. It really uplifts your mood. It makes you much more optimistic, much more open, much more adventurous,
Right.
less obsessive, less solitary, more like wanting to get out there. So I think that's a really great choice. And I mean, anyone can really do this with their chart in one way or another. It's never going to be perfect because we all still have those challenging aspects, um, like you do. Like you're always going to have Saturn opposing your sun.
Right.
But you can have it in the third and the ninth, right? Instead of having that eighth house energy. So it does free up and open up a lot of opportunities there.
The power struggles with the father with that opposition. He had a lot more influence when I lived in Chicago. Now, I'm long distance. He doesn't have that grip or hold over it. So,
Yeah.
it allowed space to heal that. And now, since we have a long distance relationship and we're just communicating via phone, it's turned into a little bit more, not as best as it can be, but, best as possible with the restrictions and kind of the trauma there. So again, this opens it up for a little more possibilities. And like I said, it freaks out my fiance, like almost like you could tell, like when I got through the border of Utah, like how I just lightened up. I was like so optimistic. I was very, affirmative with my words, and, it really freaks her out how much different I am on a day-to-day basis. So, and she likes my intensity to a certain degree, but to balance that out a little bit was better for everybody.
Yeah. Well, awesome. Well, thank you so much for sharing that and sharing your experience with everyone.
My pleasure. No, like I said, I know how it feels to kind of be an orphan and to um, forever with life. I just been searching for home ever since I was young. My parents divorced when I was 5. I've been kind of on the run since then, and that great yearning of Saturn, it was a breakthrough. I broke down some major walls, and I know I'm not the only one out there with various experiences. So if I could contribute to everyone finding their place of belonging, their tribe, or home, I would love to assist them on that journey.
Yeah, and that would be absolutely wonderful. I'm sure plenty of people are looking for that same type of guidance, and you have a very unique experience with this, and you're very good at it. And so if anybody wants to book a reading with Justin, I have a link down in the description below where you can find him. You can contact him, ask him questions, book a reading. And yeah, I think we'll probably have to do this again sometime soon. So
Hope
thank you
so.
so much.
Thank you, Heather.
All right. Bye, Justin.
Bye, guys.